We will go ahead and convene tonight's Budget Committee meeting. Marty Wilde is on the phone, I believe. Hi, Marty.
Hi.
Hi. And just a reminder, we are televised tonight, but there is no public comment period this evening. We will, if we meet again tomorrow night, we are scheduled to have public comment then, but tonight is just deliberations. So we had a motion on the floor. Before we go to that, so I'm going to just pass something out. This is something that I did literally in the last 20 minutes, and therefore it is not pretty, and it is not, so it's very much just a thought starter. But my job as chair is to help us move our process forward, not so much to advocate for a particular end game. So I want to make sure that in the thoughts of how we continue to move our process forward, we can kind of get a little clarity about what that looks like. So this is just a very, very unprofessional flow chart. And so when everyone has a copy, what this is just kind of my process mind take on the motion that's before us and other motions that I know have been proposed, tabled, potential amendments, etc. So I start here on the left, and it says one of the things we could do is make a final budget now without one-time funds, or use some kind of bridge funding mechanism for 6 to 12 months to ensure a more thorough process. So the amendment that's on the table right now to my original amendment would take us up in the upper path, which is using some kind of bridge funding, right? And so then the questions are, if we do some kind of bridge funding, is it by some combination of dipping into reserves, facility reserves, some kind of lapse mechanism, combination of the above, PERS savings, what kinds of mechanisms do we use, and for how long? And so the amendment piece right now before us is partly about the how long. There's an additional question, if we go up this path, which is where we're headed with this amendment, about do we bridge fund for the 5.3 million, or do we add in additional funding for LRAPA, or potentially for the HSC, which I know would potentially be amendments that people would want to be bringing forward tonight. So that's what's before us. The alternative path, which is not where we are, is making a final budget without one-time funds, right? Which would be adopting the city manager's proposal as written, cutting all programs by some equal percentage, making line-by-line decisions on those, making trade-offs. So I just want to kind of put that out there just for process purposes. Right now, Councilor Taylor's motion amendment to my original motion is what we have been discussing. I know there are other people, because I've had other conversations with people in the room about possible ways to combine some of the things that are in Councilor Taylor's amendment with my original motion, with Mike's lapse idea, etc. And so I hope that that's kind of the conversation we'll be able to have tonight, but we have a short amount of time. And so I wanted, and Mayor Pierce, so I wanted to make sure that we just have this kind of thought in our mind about if we can eliminate one of these paths and say we know we're going to go forward in one way, it's going to, I hope, help us narrow our conversation a little bit. And so with that, we have Councilor Taylor's amendment to my motion, which is where we left off Thursday evening. And so right now we have two people in the queue. The mayor is first, and then Councilor Clark is second.
Thank you. So I've been thinking hard about this and just want to make a few comments tonight. I've been listening carefully to all the deliberations and to the community voices, and as you know, you've been working steadily on building a sustainable budget for years, and just when you think you're there, you face another gap. You asked the city manager to address our financial situation and to make recommendations for how to address our current budget challenges. He's done exactly what was asked of him. From that information, Council put forward a fee proposal to the public, which the public soundly rejected. So now we're back where we started, and in my mind the question is, if that's not the answer, then what is? All the information we have tells us that the city cannot afford all of our current services. You have heard from many, many people about the value of those services to them and to our community. Many things have been said during the course of the recent campaign about the size and use of reserves. Currently, Council has no adopted policy on reserve size, usage, and replenishment. I suggest Council should adopt policy guidelines to inform staff, budget committee, and the public. Much has been said about using or not using one-time dollars for ongoing expenses. Again, I think council needs to adopt a policy regarding this usage. Much has been said about the use of MUFTI in urban renewal districts. Council is currently preparing a policy on MUFTI and will be taking a look at urban renewal districts too. This is really a discussion of whether there is an appropriate use for tax breaks in achieving city council community goals. It appears to me that the Budget Committee will be responsive to the public appeal to take a deeper look at the budget to see if there's any way can be found to pay for more of the city services. For some, this will seem like kicking the ball down the road and eating up reserves in the process. To others, it's an opportunity to take a closer look at city programs and expenditures and revenue, to think more creatively, although there's danger in that, and perhaps identify some new ways to reduce expenses and increase revenue. In doing this work, I recommend the use of an you want to get in a round, or you want me to finish?
Why don't you get another round for a second round? Thank you. So, Councillor Clark.
Thank you. I appreciated, too, Chair, the opportunity to have a brief conversation earlier about this and try and kind of synthesize some ideas based on what we've discussed and heard so far. It seems to me that there are kind of three large idea and questions at issue for us to talk about, whether we move forward with some kind of plan that addresses our spending for 6 months or grants authority for a full year. And I think everybody has different thoughts on that. I think the second piece is whether we do that all from one fund of reserves or from no reserves and doing it with cuts, or whether we do it from a combination of places, and then how we address a longer-term challenge. I brought forward a proposal that I thought was balanced to be able to deal with all of those, but I'm not sure there's adequate time or support around the table to just adopt that right away. So in the interim, I'd like to suggest that I think we had at least some degree of consensus around the idea of taking pieces from all of the proposals we heard the other day. I personally think that the best solution is, like Betty put forward, for us to fund this for a year. I think it's most appropriate for us to do so from a series of reserves, and to consider it then, thirdly, merely a bridge to a longer-term plan, as Chair has put forward as an idea before. And I'd like to go a little further and say that I'll make a motion, not now, because I want to allow for more discussion first, but I would make the motion that we have the Budget Committee recommend to Council that the Budget Committee and Council meet at least 6 times in the next 6 months to form a longer-term policy strategy.
Thank you. Is there anybody in the queue before Bob?
Nope.
Okay, Bob.
I have a question for staff. Staff sent out some responses to the original request from Councilor Brown, and my question is regarding the $2.8 million that is referenced on page 78 of the budget for the transition to downsize the service levels. What does that exactly mean?
Rest of that, please.
So there are dollars in the budget to help transition from the current service level to the lower service level that's proposed by the city manager. That would include things like complying with all of our contractual obligations with employees in the ways that we downsize. It would include shutting down a facility and preparing it to be held for whatever the future might bring. Sheldon Pool as an example. It would include closing down library branches and taking those facilities apart, putting the books back in the main library and so forth. And also there were some dollars to transition parks beds to something that would be easier to maintain with a lower staffing level. And that all of those costs were related to services provided by city staff. The services that the city contracts for, we didn't build any transition costs in the manager's proposed budget.
So my interpretation of that is if we do not cut these services for the 5.3 million, we have just saved the 2.8 million that's been put aside for the transition and cutting of them. Is that correct?
Yes,
So that means really our true budget gap is now 2.5 million.
one-time money.
No, that's one-time money.
I'm dealing with fiscal year 14, not the future.
Right, and I thought
But
that
we
was in one
reduced
of the-
reserves
that
by
was in your-
2.8 million.
your
It was.
motion, Yeah.
Necessarily. There hasn't been a motion made on that.
That's where that 2.8 million comes from.
Right.
Right.
The reserves,
It shows in item 1.
Item 1 up there, yeah.
they're already reserved, or lowered reserves.
Anyone else would like to be, and Counselor Zelenka?
So just to be clear, the 2.8 million came out of reserves. So if staff hadn't proposed that, there would be a $5.3 million gap, and there would be more in reserves. The fact that we lowered reserves to create this transition fund means that we have less reserves and to start with, right?
Right.
I really appreciate what you did, Chair Illig. This really makes sense to me. It kind of lays out where our forks are in the road, and as Yogi Berra said, we should take one. And so I think one of the things that I said along the way has been that if the fee fails, then we should make the cuts, and I think other people believe that too. So I think that would probably be a good place to start and see if that garners support. If it doesn't, then we can move on to the options above on the top of the page and see where we want to get those monies and for how long. So I will move that we adopt the city manager's proposed budget as written.
So, yeah,
You
that,
need, in order to,
Is there
you first
okay.
need to vote down
this amendment.
this amendment.
Can I amend this? Or substitute for it, I mean?
No, not until,
think so.
until you act on Counselor Taylor's amendment, you can't amend the main motion, and that's what you're really proposing.
Can't amend an amendment?
You could amend the amendment if what you were changing, for example, was to say in number 1 there, and 2.5 million from some other fund, then you would actually be amending, instead of the reserve for revenue shortfall, then you would be amending the proposed amendment. You're talking about amending
To a
really the
different-
main motion.
Yeah.
And so you need to first vote up or down Counselor Taylor's amendment.
Or table it,
If you table it, you're tabling the entire motion.
right? And then you can bring up a new motion.
Correct.
Right.
Right. So I'll move to table Counselor Taylor's motion.
Second. So there's been a motion to table Counselor Taylor's amendment and a second.
And that's not debatable.
That is correct. That is not debatable. So.
And to be clear, you
Yeah.
are tabling the whole thing, and so there is nothing on the table if you pass this. Free for all.
Right. Thank you, that's correct. Okay, so all those in favor of tabling Counselor Taylor's amendment? Aye. 9. So I believe that fails.
Passes
Passes?
No,
I count wrong?
fairly.
by one.
Or the no votes.
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you, yes. And all those opposed?
It's now on the table.
Okay, and there you go. Okay, thank you. Okay.
So
Oh, Marty, did you have a vote there? I'm sorry, thank you.
I am opposed to the motion to table.
You oppose the motion to table, okay. So I believe that means that it carries.
Correct.
Correct, okay. So the amendment and the original motion are tabled at this point. So
floor.
you still have the floor at this point, yeah.
So I move to adopt the city manager proposal as written.
Okay, is there a second?
It can die for lack of a second, too.
It can.
I second it.
Okay, so moved and seconded to adopt the city manager's proposal as written. Any debate? Okay, Councilor Brown is first in the queue.
Well, this is kind of despicable. I mean, we have a motion that clear support what you're proposing. I would suggest that a majority of the community is totally opposed to. We'll just see how this body acts. If we do that, there's no point in, like, we might as well just go home. right, after 5 minutes, and just go home and forget about any more public commentary on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, and any deep examination of the budget. This is the whole problem with this process. We've had one evening of actual conversation since last December, our last meeting. We actually got to talk about stuff. And what you're trying to do is remove any more discussion.
No, that's not what I'm trying to do.
And so there is no possible way I can support this motion. That's kind of sabotaging Councilor Taylor's idea, which I think there's great support for in the community. And this has been the whole problem, is we haven't been able to talk about anything. And if we adopt the manager's suggested budget, that's pretty much conversation's over, and that is ridiculous. We have a long ways to go. We can't possibly make all these decisions between now and Thursday anyway. That's the reason for Councilor Taylor's motion. We have to spend months and months and months so that we're not in this position again next year. The remedy is at hand. We have the remedy. People want to see us do that. If we adopt the manager's proposed budget, then all these cuts will be made, and I will tell you there'll be some public outrage there, as well there should be. And I will definitely not support this motion.
Thank you. Okay, Councilor Tuck?
Thank you very much. I appreciate what Councilor Zlink is trying to do in the process laid out, but I think I would guess how the motion will fare, and so in order to save that particular activity, I'm going to move to substitute the following motion. That we fund and my attempt here is to synthesize the discussion so far and allow us to move forward with something that will pass. That we fund the FY14 budget with the manager's cuts restored for an entire year with the following dollar amounts: $1.1 million from PERS savings, $1.7 million from the City Hall facility reserve, and $2.5 million from reserve for revenue shortfall, with the following caveat that the Budget Committee makes strong recommendation to Council to set up to 6 meetings with the Budget Committee prior to December 31st to formulate long-term multi-year financial strategy for the city and policy for the city.
Second.
I'll speak to that if I can with the second.
So, moved and seconded, and we have a queue, I believe.
Who's first?
Oh, yeah, you want to speak?
Thanks. The only reason to do this is because I don't want us to waste time on what we're not going to do, and I'm pretty sure everybody knows where we're going there. So I'd like to throw out something that is an attempt to synthesize what we talked about. There are a lot of reserve funds in those 3 that I mentioned. The reason I used those: one, I did see the email we saw about the PERS fund, but I had a text conversation with the House Majority Leader between then and now, and she assures me that they are making amendments that those savings will in fact be present for our use for this budget year. And she told me I could say that out loud. Number 2, I don't think anybody's going to agree on which reserves we're going to take this from or not, and that what we should do is listen to the public and take a small portion from the City Hall fund. And no matter how we work this out, the rest is going to come from reserve for revenue shortfall. So we might as well just use that and call it what it is up front, and then start preparing for what we expect out of a policy discussion over the course of the next 6 months.
So, Councilor Zelenka?
So thanks for suggesting what my intent is, Councilor Brown, but you weren't correct. What I was attempting to do here, and I thought was obvious, was to clear the decks of potential motions in an orderly fashion, kind of going up through the chair's decision tree. And the first one, of course, would be the city manager's budget. And if that doesn't have any support or insufficient support, a no is a no. And then, and I suspect that will fail. But then we can get on to the business of moving forward and figuring out how to move forward. So I won't support the motion. I'd rather us go through an orderly fashion of turning down the city manager's budget and then saying, okay, if we're not going to do that, then what are we going to do, and for how long, and with what funds?
Thank you. So, Councilor Taylor?
Okay, I don't think we should touch the City Hall reserve. We voted to rebuild City Hall, and we don't have enough money now. And I don't think we should touch the purse yet either, because we may need that to add to the City Hall funds. And council's already voted to proceed with rebuilding or remodeling or whatever you call it, City Hall. So I think that is not a viable source of money, and it would be going against what we said. And I had a urgent question. We're not meeting Thursday, are we?
No.
I just heard George talk about Thursday. I thought, I have to be somewhere else on Thursday. And I thought the mayor was read down for a second round, by the way.
On the earlier amendment.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Councilor Brown.
Well, I'm inclined to support Councilor Clark's motion because I kind of like the idea of taking it from two different reserve funds, and that way minimizing the rundown on either one of them. PERS, I'm still a little shaky about. However, as an alternative to Councilor Zelenka's motion, I might support it. I think it's clear that people expect us to fund these services. The emails that we've received and the public testimony that we've received, I hear from people. I work in a very public place, in a grocery store, and I hear every day. I do not initiate these conversations. I'm just doing my work, waiting on customers and doing gardening. And 15 to 20 people a day came up to me, and they tell me what they want the council and the budget committee to do, and it is fund all of these services and do the deep look later. And really, that's all we can do. We just don't have enough time to iron out every last problem because we're still not getting our questions answered in a timely fashion. So it's going to have to be like what Salem does, 9 meetings a year starting in January. Actually, maybe more like what Portland does. I suppose everyone's read Commissioner Fish's public letter that he wrote to the people of Portland after they passed their budget last week. And there were meetings in all of the neighborhoods, and there were, the budget committee met for months and months, and they worked it out, and they had a $20 million shortfall. And they did have to make some cuts, but they spent months working on it. And if we have 4 meetings, it's just not going to cut it. We have to do the big look later. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Councilor Surratt. Yeah, so I appreciate what both Councilor Zelenka and Councilor Clark are working on here, and even though I'm no longer chair of the Budget Committee, I will remind folks that it's best to address our comments to the merits of the motion and not to the motives of the maker of the motion. I think that's going to keep our conversation at the level that it really should be at. I understand this is a big decision. There's a lot of emotion in the community around it, but it's our job to see our way through that and do our best work for the community without buying into those emotions ourselves, I think, to some extent. I wonder if this might be premature in the course of the conversation, I wonder if Councilor Clark would accept a friendly amendment to add back what we gave last year to El Rapa in terms of $30,000 from our general fund, and then about $25,000 in in-kind support.
Yes.
And would the second of the motion accept that?
I would accept that. There it is.
Okay, great. Thank you. And while I still have my time on the clock, I will say I don't love this idea, but none of the choices before us are good choices. I was prepared to make my own motion, and if we'd gone down Councilor Zelenka's path, I would have made a motion to restore some services, but accept some of the cuts in the city manager's proposal, using some reserves for that. I appreciate Councilor Clark's motion using some of the City Hall reserve funds. I don't think that our strategy around City Hall is the reason we have a budget gap, but I recognize that folks in the community think that we shouldn't be spending that money right at this moment, and so I think it's prudent to use some of those reserves for this purpose. And I also appreciate the detail in terms of the 6 meetings by December 31st. So I will be supporting this motion.
Thank you. So, Councilor Pryor.
Thank you. What the city manager brought us was not evil. It was a no-risk budget, which is his job, is to bring us a budget that does not employ any risk. Therefore, if your expenses are greater than your revenue, you have to propose a budget that doesn't have a risk in it. What this budget committee is doing is saying we want to take that no-risk budget and take some risks. The degree of risk we're willing to take is the degree of one-time money we're willing to spend on the expectation or the hope that we'll work out some other system, or the economy will improve, or something else will come along. I'm not saying that I'm opposed to risk. I mean, certainly it's our responsibility as 16 people to gauge risk. It was the city manager's job to bring us something without risk, and he did his job. It's the budget committee's responsibility to say, are we willing to take on some additional risk in order to achieve what we think will be a greater benefit? What we're trying to weigh now is how much more risk are we willing to take in order to achieve a greater benefit. And everybody sitting in this room is saying, yeah, I'm willing to take some risk because I see, in my mind, a payoff. We'll be able to fund some things that we currently can't fund. But what we have to say is, whenever you take a risk, you can either win or you can lose. And in a year, will we have won or will we have lost? Now, I understand we want to take meetings and we want to decide new systems and come up with all that, and that's great. But will that result in an increase in revenue? Will we have more money to work with at the end of this process, or will we have come up with a system to cut something else? That's okay. That's fine. It's our job to gauge that risk. And from what we've heard is, take all the risk you need to, fund it all, because we want these services and we're willing to take the risk and gamble to have them.
Thank you. So, Ken.
Already, okay. I guess I'd like to put something out there as maybe an idea. It's not quite a recommendation yet. I'm not exactly clear on the process of how to fit this in, but I think it needs to be said. I found myself thinking over the weekend as we left Thursday night about how we were going forward, and I think I probably would support the motion that's out there now. But I think what has started to trouble me is that we have some recommendations from the manager that are in front of us. They've been in front of this group for a year or two, some of them for quite a while, and we're all pretty familiar with them. It certainly has come as some surprise to members of the community, but I think the circle of people here have been pretty familiar with them. And I found myself getting concerned that as we go down the road to put something together where we study them for another year and come up with a process, and I think our intentions are really good, but in fact, when we're all done here in the next couple of days, we end up not making any reductions whatsoever to what, in a 5-year context, is a $30 million gap. It's troubling me, and I guess I would want to put that out there and see if there's any interest in discussing that further. I think there are some program reductions on this list that we ought to put up on the table and talk about a little bit, that would maybe go some distance in helping to kind of fund this. And we may find ourselves then going forward, again, in a 5-year context, instead of a $30 million gap, maybe we've got a $20 million gap or 15. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Ken. Mayor.
I just wanted to comment in relation to what Ken just said. I just want to remind everybody that we have taken a $24 million cut out of our budget over the last few years. And in fact, if we hadn't done that, we'd be facing a $30 million gap right now. So I think we have been pretty diligent about trying to do that. The other thing I wanted to say about City Hall is I'm sort of bothered by reserves for project specific. And the reason I say that is we just got rid of 2 holes downtown. And the idea of setting us up for another one that could be there for a long time just doesn't make good sense to me. I want to say the other thing I was going to recommend if I finished talking earlier. as we do this long-term work, which I think we might well do, then I recommend the use of an implications wheel as a tool to think out the implications of proposals, because I think that's something that's been missing. This is a best practice tool. The wheel calls for looking at the implications for your decisions, and you go 4 rounds out, so the implications of the implications of the implications, so you really think about what's going to happen if you follow the trail that you say you're going to follow. So I personally think adopting needed policy, getting all the questions answered, and seeing if there are new ways of dealing with the budget that have any credibility can better educate the public and clear up misinformation and confusion. And because in the end, the Budget Committee and the Council have to adopt a budget based on sound fiscal policy that lets the public know you've all concluded together that that's the best way to preserve what we value in the community now and in the future. So taking the time to work through this, coming to a stronger agreement, will give the community confidence that they clearly need to have. So I think taking this time, even though it's chance-taking, and it will take a lot of work, as George has said, I still think it's worth it if we take the opportunity to educate the public and really walk through what's true and what's not true, and come out with something that this body can really agree on.
Thank you. So I put myself into the queue next. So I appreciate the synthesized thinking here. I, too, am concerned about, I'm not generally in favor of using reserves for one-time spending, and I think that's a long-term issue we still very much have to address. We have to really figure out how we're going to be in a different place a year from now. Otherwise, this was just another exercise of another year of the same thing. So my hope in making the original motion, and I'm still comfortable with this motion as well, because I think it achieves the same aim, which is allowing us and forcing us to take the time to create a different process around how are we going to have more revenue, and if so, what's that going to look like, or are we going to cut, and if so, what's that going to look like? How are we going to make those decisions in conjunction with the community, with feedback from the community, while we educate the community about pieces of our budget that they may or may not fully understand. So although I very much appreciate, Councilor Pryor, your comments about this being a risk, because it is a risk. It is a risk that we will be in exactly the same place next year with an even bigger hole in front of us. I believe this is a risk we need to take right now, and so I will be supporting the motion. So, thank you. I'm sorry, Bob.
Boy, where to start? I'm going to agree with most of everything you ever said. George, I appreciate your comments. I love the fact that we're having discussion. That, to me, has been very key. It is a risk. I would love to see us have a nice city hall. I think Eugene deserves a nice city hall. I like your motion. I like the way things are broken out. I have only one concern with your motion. I would love to think that we can get it in 6 meetings. And I'm not sure if we can, because I know the council is on break from August 1st to September 9th, and then from December 11th to the 1st of the year. That really gives us like 3 months.
That's a recommendation.
So I know, and I'm for it. In terms of using reserve funds, there's always that concern. I am a bit of a believer that funding for the city hall should be a bond measure that's voted on and supported by the community, and money should not be taken out of our general fund to create a reserve to build the city hall. That's my belief. Might not be shared by everybody else, but I think the citizens should vote on that, and I think given the opportunity and that they see the discourse that we're having here, maybe it will create some more of that trust, and they'll believe that we can be good stewards of their money and build a reasonable facility. But we shouldn't take away money from the programs and the services that the city provides so that we can build a city hall. It should be something that is separate from the budget. That is just my belief. I will be voting in support of this motion.
Others who would like to be in the queue for discussion? Councilor Zelenka.
So my experience with groups like this is that they always fill the time allotted. And if we give ourselves a year, we'll take a year. If we give ourselves 6 months, we will take 6 months. And I think this is a very doable task within 6 months. And I think if we did it in 6 months, we could, if we found a solution, then we could actually save that 6 months of reserves, which is over $2.5 million. So I'd rather see us do this in 6 months and not spend the extra money on the reserves and force ourselves into that position of having to do that, and that we take it all out of the reserve for revenue shortfall. So I was hoping that could be a friendly amendment that you'd accept. If we don't take, if we find ourselves at the 5th month and not ready to make decisions, we can, through a supplemental budget, extend a month if we need to do that. But I don't think we really need to take 6 or a full 12 months to do this. I think it's very doable within 12.
So are you making
Would you accept that as a friendly amendment?
No, but I'll speak to it when it's my turn.
Okay, so Counselor Taylor?
Thank you. Stewardship was mentioned. I think stewardship of the public's property is very important, and the City Hall building, which we have allowed to deteriorate over the years, is public property, and we should have been taking care of it. We didn't. It's too late now. It's not that we want a new City Hall. We don't have a City Hall right now, and it's very important, I think, for the community to have a City Hall. And I think I really strongly oppose taking any money out of the facility reserve. We need more money in it instead of out of it. As far as we have spent that money, we've taken it down for various things over the years, but now we're at the point where we do not even have a center of government. And the building, and also it's downtown, we've just been trying to improve it, to fill the holes, and to make things look better, and urging other people to do the same. And now if we leave that, we're leaving it too long already, we leave that block there, sitting there. And in the meantime, we're paying for security to keep people out, security to protect the artwork that's there, and we have no assurance of anything happening, of a bond issue passing for that. In any way, that would take too much time. So I strongly oppose using any City Hall facility reserves.
Thank you. So, Marty, do you have any comments before we see if there's anyone else who wants to be in the first round and then go to the second round?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Just if you'd be so kind as when you call the question to repeat the issue, it will make it easier for me, because sometimes the connection isn't great. Usually it's fine, but...
Yes, absolutely, we'll do that. Thank you. Any other first rounds before we head into second round? Okay, Chelsea?
So in general, I'm sort of with Councilor Zelenka in the sense that I think it's better to go with the 6-month strategy, because it strikes that balance between being fiscally responsible and doing due diligence to look into some suggestions that have been mentioned. It just feels like it's a more responsible path to take. That being said, I've heard that particularly for grant-dependent programs like the Human Services Commission in particular, that having just 6 months worth of money makes it difficult for them to leverage grants throughout at whatever level they're applying. So I would be definitely interested in looking into funding that for a year at a minimum. The other question I have about this motion is what is the outcome that we're really looking for? Is it to better educate everyone around the table and make everyone, say, as attuned with the budget as, say, maybe Sue is, knowing every little detail, and then we can make a better informed decision? Is that our outcome? Or are we looking to change the process? I just would like some clarity about what are we really looking for at the end of those 6 months? What would be the best case? I personally would like to see something in there that would make this process at least a little more transparent to the public. I feel like they don't understand exactly how the city manager came up with those cuts. Maybe they think it's unfair. Maybe they think, I hear a lot of times, we need to thin out management or something like that. So at least if we could have a little bit more explanation, or at least something easier to digest, I think that would be a good outcome to think about.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll now go into second round, and so Councilor Brown, you were the first one in the second round.
Yes, I'm wondering if this is the place to perhaps ask Councilor Clark if he would accept yet one more friendly amendment to restore $175,000 to the Human Service Commission that would be cut if we, from the FY13 levels to the FY14 adopted budget. This is in addition to the suggested cuts. In addition to those cuts, another 175 in the proposed budget is missing from last year's allocation level.
Point of order, is that a part of the manager's proposed cuts that add up in the 5.3?
No.
I would respectfully decline and look for a separate motion to support that would add that in a particular way.
Okay, I have a question for the attorney then. Can I make this motion later to somehow add it on to whatever budget recommendation the committee does to?
You have
give
two
the council?
choices. You can, because that is part of this amendment, this is a circumstance where you could move to amend this amendment to add it. Alternatively, you can wait until the committee votes on this amendment. If it passes, you can then move to amend what would then be the main motion.
I see, okay. All right, well, the reason, I've been assured by Human Service people that there is $175,000 missing in the proposed FY14 budget. And it's kind of hard to tell because I go back and forth from page 103 of the proposed budget of FY14, and then I go back to page 91 of the adopted FY13, and the figures are all over the place. Costs aren't itemized, and services aren't itemized in FY14. It's hard to see what's going on here, but I've been told that it's $175,000 short in FY14. That's why I would like to see it added back. And the reason I want to see it added back is because I feel that any cuts we make to the Human Service Commission is totally a false economy. And, well, we may save a few dollars here and there, but down the line, that is going to cost us a heck of a lot more money when those agencies can't address these very serious social problems. And when they lose clients, there's going to be all kinds of hurt out there, and it's going to cost us more later.
So, Councilor Clark, before you go, I'm going to let the staff answer that one for you.
I can just tell you where that 175 came from. You might remember last year during the Budget Committee conversation, the Budget Committee recommended that restoring $175,000 to the Human Service Commission on a one-time basis, and identified Opportunity Eugene funding as the source. And so at the time, there was money proposed to go towards Occupy Eugene, or Opportunity Eugene. The Budget Committee took 175 of that, put over to HSC, so there was no net increase in the total budget. And so the budget coming back, again, assumed that was one-time funding. And so my budget does not include the one-time funding. The same way with LRAPA, it did not include LRAPA because that was also one-time funding. So that's why it's not included.
Thank you. Councilor Clark.
Thank you. To address some of the things both Councilor Zelenka said and said. The reason for the 6 month versus a year, the reason I did the year was kind of twofold. One, I wanted to synthesize several pieces of the discussions we've had over the previous meetings that sounded like they had enough support to pass, and it sounded to me from previous discussions like a year had more support in the room than 6 months, and appreciating trying to bring other people's points of view into it. Secondly, exactly what you said. I had Steve's emails as well, and Human Services discussions about how difficult that would be, and then towards Councilor Zelenka's concern and yours, the reason I put out 6 meetings in the next 6 months. Sure, everybody works better with a deadline, and that will be a wonderful thing for us to have, and hopefully we can get it done by then. But I think it's wiser for us to fund the year, make it secure for Human Services to know that they can do their good work, make it secure for the city staff to understand where the budget's coming from, take the risk. But then we have another option. We can complete our work within that 6 months and find a different direction that can allow for savings in those latter 6 months. Every year in December, the council has supplemental budget time, and we consider those motions. We can do it in reverse this year, perhaps, where instead of adding things, we can cut budget for the rest of the year. That's a possibility. I would also say that this approach gives us the opportunity to talk about how we eliminate the deficits in following years, in the multi-year. That's essentially the point behind it, is how do we balance the budget more effectively in the several years ahead?
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to be in the queue before we?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a quick comment. I agree totally with what you said. We just need time, and fortunately, yes, we definitely don't want to be in this position this time again next year. But we definitely do not want that, and I think we should be able to avoid that. And who knows, we may have to make some cuts between now and then. But we just need more time to study it. I think we need to make a renewed commitment, we Budget Committee members. I think I do. I just wonder how many of us truly understand the budget and take the time to really delve into it. Like, for instance, the proposed FY14 budget is 167 pages long. The adopted FY13 budget was 375 pages long. And in former years, it's been 475, close to 500 pages of information. So you can compare years and go back and forth. It's hard to make that kind of comparison with this. This is 200 pages lighter than the approved budget last year. So it's hard to, things aren't, itemized. So, but the fortunate thing is we have a couple models. We have Salem. They start their budget stuff seriously in January and meet, I believe it's 9 times. And they take the time, 5 months before they pass their budget. Portland did a very deep look this year, because they had a $20 million deficit in their budget. And so they went out, they held meetings in every neighborhood all over town. They asked people what their priorities were. I don't know the details of their process, but I intend to ask Portland staff and find out, how did you set this up? How did you get this ball rolling? And we have some models, we can do it. But we need the time to do it. We need to fund all this stuff in the meantime. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Zelenka.
Clarifying question, Councilor Clark, and the who in Chair Illig's, she had the chair of the budget committee, the city manager, and the mayor, and the council president get together to develop the outline of the process to be brought back. Who, in your mind, would develop the outline of how the process should move forward? But that's not a bad idea, because I'm not any one of those 4.
I was rather in support of it for similar reasons.
Yeah, that you're not one of those.
Sorry, the way I thought about it was to have council do it, but that's unwieldy. It's simpler to do it the way that the chair had suggested it, so I'll accept that then.
So,
As a friendly
amendment? Okay.
Right. That they get together to outline the process. But for me, just to speak to it, it's the process is for us to have an open discussion over the course of those 6 meetings about the central question, which is appropriate city policy direction for that multi-year gap.
Great, thank you. Okay, so
Second has to.
we have to second that amendment.
So the second, so George.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Okay, great, second, okay.
No, you have to ask him.
George has to agree to that, but it wasn't technically a friendly, it was.
Well, I'll agree to it, but I think other voices should be listened to, like Portland and Salem city staff. But that's a good start, though.
Okay.
Good start.
So, Councilor Taylor.
Thank you. I have to be careful not to talk about something else maybe. But one thing, I wanted to respond to the number of meetings, that some places only have 1 meeting, 1 full day, on the other hand, and I'm more inclined to go in that direction than meetings every month. Except right now, we do need some extra meetings. But I think the city's responsibility, city government's responsibility, first responsibility is to do things that no one else can do for us. Things like police, fire, parks, and public property. And that includes taking care of a city hall, public buildings. And the other things like human services are things that we help with, but they're not the things that nonprofits can do and that they can raise money for. They can't raise taxes, but they can raise money other ways. And we can't go and have a fundraiser, I don't think. Anyway, I think that we should do our basic responsibilities first and then do the others as we're able to. And I will have to vote against this motion because of that thing from City Hall Facilities Reserve. I'm totally against that.
Thank you. Councilor Pryor.
Just quickly, the number of meetings is really, for me, less an issue than the content of the meetings. And I think we need to make sure that as a budget committee, we recognize our responsibility is to set the policy or to help council set the policy and not to begin to try to operate the city. It's not my job to tell the police department how many detectives they should have, and it's not my job to tell Public Works how many trucks they should have, because I'm not an engineer and I'm not a policeman and I don't know what they truly need. But it's very appropriate for us to say, this area is more important than that area. That's very important for us to do, and if we can come up with a process that helps us do that more effectively with the public's help, I think that's great. So whatever number of meetings we have need to be focused on our appropriate role as helping set the policy for the city, not to think we're smart enough to know how to operate the city. And there's a distinction between those two.
Thank you. So, is there anyone? Do we need to ask anyone else for another?
I just have
round?
one more.
Okay. So, is there anyone else in this? I guess we're in the second round. Anyone else in the second round before we move to the third round? Okay. So, Councilor Clark.
I just wanted to say that I also would very much like and expect that in those 6 meetings and as part of that ongoing process, we'll talk about the 2% lapse idea that I brought forward. I only pulled it back off the table rather than force the discussion again because I recognize there were a lot of questions raised by that, and intelligent, wise decisions about whether to implement it or not take a good deal more time for conversation and information gathering. And so a part of why a number of meetings is to give us that time to explore that among several other options for how we proceed. So I expect that's part of the conversation as well.
Okay. So, clarifying question right here.
The original motion said that this would be a proposed motion to be taken to a public hearing on Wednesday. Is your intention that this is going to a public hearing on Wednesday as opposed to the Budget Committee taking final action today?
I would assume that it's the wise thing for us to take any of our recommendations prior to council to a public hearing. So I would say that that's the case, that we do that on Wednesday.
Okay. And so, do we need to amend that? Yes. So we'll add that language in. Okay. Great. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Councilor Evans.
I'm inclined to support Councilor Clark's motion, but I want to remind us that this discussion is not just a discussion about cutting. We also have to have a discussion about revenue. And when we talk about revenue, we need to talk about user fees. We also need to talk about what we need to look at in terms of both Councilor Polling and myself's concern about how we do business, which is not a meddling discussion, Councilor Pryor, but an attempt for us to be able to shape policy in an arena where we have all the facts on the table and all the options that we need to be able to structure a long-term solution to what we're doing. Because we'll be back here next year, we'll be back here the year after, 5 years from now. Hopefully, never mind about that. But, we will continually be in this cycle as Lane County's found itself in, as other entities in our region have found, this state of Oregon and about 38 other states in the United States and a whole bunch of cities have. So I think we need to have a discussion about what it is that we do, what it is that we value, and a prioritization of those items so that we can properly fund those things and do that in a purposeful manner that won't show up where, my kids or some other people's grandkids will have to deal with a big mess in 2025 or 2030.
Okay. So, Councilor Storette.
Yes, I just had a clarifying question. I got confused with the move to take this to a public hearing on Wednesday piece. So we would have the option of voting on this as our recommendation, but no matter what we do, there's going to be a public hearing on our recommendation. No? Yes?
So my understanding was that what we bring something to the public hearing that is the Budget Committee's recommendation to council. And then that's what goes to the public hearing, right?
Okay.
And then council, of course, has final approval for whether they accept that recommendation or not.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's not
Yeah.
anything
It is the
weird or
final
different.
recommendation.
It just sounds
Right. It's,
couched in a way that wasn't recognizable to me. Okay.
yes. Okay. So Councilor Poling. Yeah.
That was the same question.
Oh, same question? Okay, great.
Good.
And Bob?
Thank you. I take Councilor Evans' comments to heart. I feel like the process that we've been going through is only half of the equation. We're looking at how to cut or how to move money out of one pocket into the other pocket. What I'm kind of hoping that we can do in our future meetings as we deliberate through the remainder of this year is also bring in the other side of that discussion, and that's how can we increase our revenue? How can we make our pocket a little deeper? How can we afford better to do what we already do, and what else can we add into it? Being in marketing and advertising, the same with Councilor Clark, we're kind of innovators in that. That's kind of what we do, is we help people generate funds, and we try to bring new and different ideas to the table. I have a few in the back of my head. They could be as lame-brained as you could ever think of. But until we, give them legs and let them walk around the room for a few minutes, we don't know if it's going to work or not. And I'm willing to be the fool and put them out there before you. But I think we need to look at that revenue side just as hard and under the same kind of microscope that we're currently using on the reduction side. And maybe if we can find new revenue streams, it'll make the reductions a whole lot less painful in the future.
Point of information. So it's my understanding that the city manager and his staff's budget was built on the goals of the city council, and that one of the goals of the city council is for fair, stable, adequate financial resources, of which a sub-bullet point, I'm reading this, is new or expanded revenue sources. My understanding is that it is a discussion for the city council, not a discussion for the budget committee. Is that correct? I don't know who can answer my question.
I'll leave that to the council to respond to.
We can expand if we want to.
Never
We can
too
expand
much.
it if we choose to.
Yeah, but it's the council, though, right? It's not a discussion of the budget committee, is my question.
Unless council decides to expand.
We can ask the budget committee to help us.
The authorities with
Okay,
the
you
council.
can
The decision is ours, the discussion can be amongst
So
all.
the discussion could be here at the budget committee, but then the
Council's
council.
authority.
Got it, okay.
Right.
Yeah, we can ask you to the party.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that what you wanted to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can come to the party.
Right.
Final decisions with
But by invitation only.
Okay,
Yes.
so have we been invited?
You're strongly recommending that we invite you.
Well, if you invite
motion.
us,
Yes.
because I think revenue obviously must be a part of this. I mean, who wants to cut services, right? But without revenue, you can't pay for services, and as Councilor Taylor says, and I support that, I mean, if we got to go bare bones, we've got to think of the essential function of government. I personally would like to fund services as well, but I just don't see any money. And maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see money. And so it'd be very helpful to me as a member of the budget committee to be invited to the table to talk about how we're going to get it, or have the city council have conversation of how it's going to get it. And then as a member of the budget committee, I can say, great, now that you've got this money, let's fund all these services. So,
You're in.
Thank you. Anyone else need to be in the queue before we read? I'm going to read this through so that Marty can hear it. And then we will go to a vote if there's no one else who would like to comment. Okay, great. All right, so we're going to go ahead and read this. Marty, are you still with us?
I am. I hear you fine.
Okay, so here's the motion. Move that the Budget Committee take to the public hearing on Wednesday the following proposed recommendation for City Council, : 1, fund fiscal year 14 budget with city manager's recommended cuts restored for 1 year by the following: $1.1 million from PERS, PERS savings, really, $1.7 million from the City Hall Facility Reserve, $2.5 million from Reserve for Revenue Shortfall. 2, Budget Committee shall make strong recommendation to Council to set up to 6 meetings with Budget Committee prior to December 31st, 2013 to formulate a long-term sustainable financial strategy for the city. 3, Budget shall include restored funding to LRAPA, $30,000 of which will come from the general fund and $25,000 from in-kind. 4, request that the chair of the Budget Committee, the mayor, the council president, and the city manager develop a proposed process for the additional Budget Committee meetings that would be held after the FY14 budget is adopted.
I just ask one quick clarification. Just on the 1.1 million per savings, if for whatever reason that actually doesn't materialize to be 1.1 million, maybe it's something less or maybe it's more. If it's something less than that, should we just assume that whatever doesn't result from the savings would come out of Reserve for Revenue Shortfall?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, and so do we need to put that in there probably in some way? We need to capture that?
Not necessarily. I just want to
Okay.
make sure that if that doesn't occur, then we are taking that from the Reserve for Revenue Shortfall.
That was legislative intent.
Okay. Great, so we are now ready to take a vote. So this is the motion before us. So all those in favor of this motion, please say aye.
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 Okay, and that's Marty, you're yes?
I'll have them raise your
I'm an aye, yes.
Okay, and please raise your hand if you're an aye, sorry. Okay.
Don't drop the phone.
Okay, all those opposed, say no. Okay, 1, 2. Okay, and so this motion carries. So this is how we will be moving forward.
So that was an amendment to the main motion.
Oh, that's right.
You need to vote
Thank you.
again on the main motion unless somebody else
I appreciate
has more discussion or an amendment to what is now the main motion.
Okay, so this was the amended version,
Yes.
but the amendment passed,
It was a
right?
substitute.
Right.
It was a substitute, okay, okay. So,
Substitute, yeah.
okay, move to substitute. So now we need to go back to the original.
So now this is the main motion, and you just need to vote again.
Okay.
Unless there's additional conversation you want to
Okay,
have.
great, so thank you. Is there additional conversation? Okay, then we will vote again. So, all those in favor? Aye, hands up. Okay. All those opposed, no?
Marty?
And Marty, you were a yes or a no?
This is for the original motion,
Yes.
which mirrors the one we just voted on.
Yeah.
Mirrors the
No,
amendment.
so it's
Then my vote is aye.
yeah, this is the vote to substitute this one. So the wording is the same wording we just read.
Yeah. Aye, thank you.
Okay, yep.
So that passes.
Okay, so that passes. So, do you have a question?
Point of clarification, we have a meeting tomorrow night to take public testimony. Is it possible to combine that with a Wednesday night meeting for public hearing on this now passed motion?
I think if that's
I
the
mean,
will.
legally, because of
legally.
notification requirements, can we do that?
Are you asking, can the Wednesday meeting be moved to Tuesday, or can tomorrow's meeting, in essence,
not
not
happen.
happen,
Right.
and everything happens on Wednesday?
Yes.
Tomorrow's meeting does not need to happen
Right.
if the Budget Committee decides, or the chair decides, not to happen.
So-
Wednesday's meeting has to happen.
Okay. So is there a motion to not have tomorrow evening's meeting?
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
okay, second. So that's been moved and seconded that we do not have tomorrow evening's meeting and that we proceed directly to Wednesday evening's meeting. Is there any discussion? Okay, let's vote on the motion. All those in favor? Aye? Okay, Marty, do you have a vote?
Aye. Aye, yes.
All those opposed? Okay, all right, great.
Just for the...
Okay, so thank you very much. So, based on that, so we're done, right? We just need to, okay, meeting is adjourned. See you Wednesday evening. Thank you.